Hi, everybody. So I made this document so that I could go over a couple pieces of general advice I had for everyone as you move into the last week where you're doing the revising. So I did make individual feedback videos for everybody who submitted that first draft of the case study, but I thought a general video kind of talking about some of the issues that might crop up when you're revising would be helpful. So you can see that I picked the topic health and wealth to do a sort of sample on, and I'll link this in the announcement where I post this video. I chose the health and wealth one because that seems to be what most people in the class chose. Just so I think that some of the advice will be specifically helpful here, but I also think that it is generally helpful to everybody to see the revising scenarios. So the first thing I want to talk about would be the idea of the real life scenarios. So I want to point out again that the study you have is a very helpful one. I'm going to just pull that up. When you look at the sample paper that we have here, the sample case study, you can see in this introduction, this is the real life scenario that's highlighted. And this is a really helpful idea for those of you who are doing the one that is about language and power. I think a scenario akin to this would be a nice one to use in your own paper if you're doing the language and power, like something like this scenario. But you can see that this is a specific imaginary scenario. That this person is describing. And that's what you really want to make sure you're achieving. So it's not general, that it has some specifics to really grab on, like a particular individual who makes it all the way through K through 12 schooling, goes through college, thinks that it's the ticket to the future, and then realizes, well, maybe not. So this kind of imaginary scenario is a really good thing to do for your real life scenario. So I have some examples over here, like if I were going to do health or wealth, that I might include. For instance, I might talk about how not being able to afford a doctor might result in a poor person ultimately ending up in a more expensive situation with an ER visit. Maybe I could look up how much an ER visit costs. This real life scenario, you can bring in actual facts. You can look for articles if you're looking for a secondary source. You could look for articles that talk about these things. You could also just use the internet for statistics from places that could help you get a scenario or bolster a scenario with an interesting statistic or fact. You just want to make sure you included an in-text citation and then a reference in your references page. Another thing I could do is I could look up how much an average doctor's visit costs in the US to show just how expensive even routine care might be. I could discuss the growing wage gap and use the sample income to show how someone living at the poverty line might have to choose between medicine or food or rent. All of these are just examples, real life scenarios with specifics that I could give to illustrate that there is a relationship between health and wealth. If you're doing something like language and power as your topic, you could think about maybe giving hypothetical scenarios of two different candidates and then asking like which one should get hired. You could include, if you could maybe find an actual job description or you could summarize a job description that basically shows that many job descriptions don't ask candidates to actually be able to know the difference between, you and your, or your spelled with an apostrophe or not. That a lot of job descriptions don't seem to actually require grammar. You could give an example of a job that in no way requires somebody to be able to, or to have to know the difference between commas, and how it seems really out of touch that that a person who isn't as grammatically aware might not get hired for a job that has nothing to do with that particular skill. These are examples for the language and power real life scenarios that you could include, just like hypothetical little moments. For freedom and security, if you could think of, I think probably your best option for a topic like that would be to think of an actual program or scenario where citizens have encountered freedom being sacrificed for the sake of security, and maybe describing that real life scenario of a program that's gone into existence, maybe something that happened during coronavirus, maybe something that happened in terms of things like the Patriot Act, which I think the people who have done, the couple people who've chosen freedom and security have spoken about. But those are really good real life scenarios talking about like the conflict between the ideas of like sacrificing freedom for security. So what you're looking for in a real life scenario is just some specific instances of how these two topics butt up against each other and the relationship between them, whether it's health and wealth, language and power, or freedom and security. So those are some examples I had, but you can see, regardless of your topic, that I'm really trying to go for some specificity here. I'm looking for like a really concrete example that's going to make the reader go like, huh, I never really thought about that before. Another one that I thought was really interesting from freedom and security, that comes directly from an article, is the idea that because of gun safety, in that one article, because of gun control or a lack of gun control, there's more that citizens are more subject to their bags being searched. So more like personal property searches because of safety, because there's a lack of gun control. That is a really interesting example that kind of shows a relationship. And that comes from an article. So you could do that as well, pull something from an article. So the thesis I have for this is there's an alarming connection between the increasing wage gap and the health of the American public. Okay, so that's my thesis statement. What I have down here are some revising scenarios I want to go over. So when we're talking about the revising scenarios, I'm giving some situations that many of you have encountered regardless of your topic. So in this situation, I'm saying that the evidence doesn't match and the quote isn't set up. What I mean by the idea that the evidence doesn't match is that if you look at my topic sentence, and I encourage you to do this for every one of your body paragraphs, when you look at my topic sentence, it's focusing on how health, that wealth ensures health by creating a more comfortable lifestyle for those with money. If you look down at my piece of evidence, you can see that I've kind of gotten to this idea of stress. Finding time to maintain health does not have to be a further source of stress for people who have wealth. Then I have a quote that's about stress, but this quote does not actually support what I'm saying in my topic sentence. It's out of context. It starts talking about those stress tests on monkeys. It's not set up. It's just dumped right into the paragraph itself. And because of that, it doesn't really do its job. The reason you incorporate evidence is not just to incorporate evidence because your teacher asked you to, because that's the assignment, but to incorporate evidence that supports your point. So in the revising process, you may have to ask yourself if your evidence actually proves your point. And if it doesn't, you may need to replace your evidence, or you may need to rewrite your topic sentence. That's a major part of this revision process that I want people to engage in. So you can see what I did in this case was I took this paragraph, and down here I did a revision of it. And what I did was I actually ended up changing both the topic sentence and the information I included, because I realized reading my paragraph that what I was talking about was less about ensuring a more comfortable lifestyle and more about stressful existence. And once I established that, I also decided that this was not the best quote to include. So I picked a different quote, and you can see that I crossed it out. The sentences that are in black are the ones that I left, but I did change my topic sentence. I changed my evidence, and I reworked the end of my paragraph to fit in a little bit better with my evidence. So it's basically the same ideas from up here, but I just changed the wording a little bit. So you can see that what I've done now is I have created a situation where I have a topic sentence that talks about having a less stressful existence for wealthy people, and a quote that talks about, in contrast, how people who struggle with financial stress say that it affects their ability to lead a healthy lifestyle. So that's the quote I've chosen to include. And you can see here that instead of just dumping the sentence into the paragraph rather in its entirety, I have this setup here. so that I'm working the quote into my actual sentence. And that's what I mean by set up your quotes, if you got that feedback. This is a second revising scenario that I have here that I actually ended up rewriting the entire paragraph, and that may happen to you. In this case, my evidence contradicted my topic sentence, and the quote required block formatting. So what I've included in this case is an example where I saw a quote that sounded like it looked good, that seemed like it was related, and so I put it into my paragraph. But when I really thought about the context of the quote, it was saying the opposite of what I was, which meant that I needed to go back and change my topic sentence. You can see that I started with this same idea of like another way that wealth can help to ensure health is by ensuring a more comfortable lifestyle with those with money. And then I have this quote from Sapolsky about the rich who spend more of their own resources on gated communities, private schools, bottled water, and expensive organic food. That does make it seem like, oh, well, the rich are able to give themselves a more comfortable lifestyle. They're able to afford these things. But if you look at the rest of the quote, what Sapolsky's actually saying is that creating this atmosphere where they're trying to eliminate stress to construct thick walls to keep everything stressful out is in of itself creating stress. And so in this case, if I hadn't been paying attention to the context and I'd only included the first line, I would be putting in something that isn't quite a complete argument. So you can see what I did down here was I rewrote it. I changed my topic sentence and I said, however, wealth doesn't always guarantee a stress-free existence. In fact, Robert Sapolsky explains that wealthy people, and then this is a block quote. So if I told you that you needed to include a block quote, this is what it looks like. You put the author and the publication year up here. You put a colon, you indent the entire section. So it's like this is all the quoted material. And actually I need to update that. You put the period before the citation, and that's what a block quote should look like. If I told you to do a block quote, and this is still like too fast, you're like, oh wait, you can always Google it. Google APA 7 block quote format, and you will get a ton of instructions on how to format this. It's for any time your quote is longer than 40 words. So if your quote is longer than 40 words, which I highlight this and I see that it is in fact 43, and you can see down at the very bottom, 43 of 809 words down there. That means it needs to be a block quote. So anything over 40 words needs to be formatted like this. You can see that what I've done is I have reevaluated my position to make sure that my evidence, that I'm actually showing like the right side of my evidence. And this is an example of how I can include some of the subtleties and the nuances. It does say in the assignment that you want to get into the complexity of everything that you're doing. You want to get into the complexity of the topic, and you're not required to come down in an either or way. But one thing I do want everyone to watch out for is to make sure that in trying to stay objective, you're not just summarizing and you're not just presenting constantly contradicting information. You are trying to come to some conclusion about this topic, even if it's a subtle one. And so here I'm admitting that wealth doesn't always guarantee a stress-free existence. And that's a complex part that I want to talk about. I'm not just going to go with the idea like, oh, well, health equals wealth, because it is complicated. And you can see that when you look down here at my core values that I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I chose the core values of critical evaluation, fairness, and proactivity. When you incorporate your core values, you want to talk about how your core values interact with the relationship between the two ideas. So some people have been like, well, my core value is trust, and that plays into the fact that you can trust me when I write this paper. That's not exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to connect these ideas to the actual topics. So you can see that I've included for critical evaluation, if that's one of my core values, I see that this is a complicated topic that can't be easily solved with a single approach like free healthcare. And you can see how I'm going to talk about each of these things in my core values paper. So I'll attach this for you, but hopefully this helps a little bit in the revising process.